Hello, everyone. So, for today, I'm going to try out something different, something I haven't done before. Generally speaking, I enjoy talking about movies. I've always liked discussing movie plots and analyzing their interpretation with friends and family. And I recently watched this movie called The Wild Robot, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And there was just so many interesting concepts and threads that I wanted to pull on in this movie that I just decided to record this kind of impromptu, really. I don't really consider myself qualified or nuanced enough with the art of filmmaking for this to be truly a review of the movie. And that's not really what I'm going to attempt to do today. But rather, this is more so me talking about things that I found in The Wild Robot to be truly interesting. When I first watched the trailer for this movie, I was fairly excited about the fact that it had elements of AI and robots juxtaposed into a wild setting with animals. I remember feeling like it would make for an interesting premise. And after I had watched the actual movie, walking out of the theater, I felt like the movie had explored so many philosophical topics that this juxtaposition of AI and nature had set up for it. For me, the movie just worked great. It was one of those kids' movies that offered a lot for adults in the theater as well. We'll deep dive into some of these philosophical topics in a bit, but let's start from the top. The movie was directed by Chris Sanders, who has had previous successes like How to Train Your Dragon and Lilo and Stitch. I did not really do too much research prior to going to this movie. Only after I walked out of the theater and I started Googling about the movie did I find out that the movie was actually an adaptation of a novel by the author Peter Brown. And apparently, this is a fairly popular book that is quite widely used in book clubs and schools. I haven't personally read the novel that this movie is based off of yet, but if the internet is anything to go off of, it looks like the book is pretty great. If some people actually say it's better than the movie adaptation. So, yeah, I definitely do plan to check out the book eventually. But yeah, for now, as far as this podcast goes, there's going to be mild spoilers. I personally don't think that the spoilers that I'm going to mention in this podcast episode are going to affect your movie watching experience, even if you were to listen to this prior to watching the movie. But that being said, there's going to be mild spoilers, potentially equivalent to what is revealed in the trailer for this movie itself. And yeah, like I flagged initially, this is not really going to be me attempting to do a formal review of this movie, but let me get what I would consider the review part of this out of the way. So, I truly enjoyed watching this movie, and if I was to summarize my feelings about this movie, I would put it as one of those kids' movies that just works so well for adults, similar to films like Wall-E or Up. There's just so much in this for adults to ponder over and explore in terms of philosophical meanings. And couple that with extremely beautiful animation and a lot of characters with big personalities, a lot of slapstick comedy that really works well for kids. I feel like this is an instant classic. I also found the pacing of the movie to be close to perfect. The movie starts off with a lot of time invested in setting up the premise, exploring the characters, and then as the movie progressed, there was rarely any parts where the pace felt slow. All of this was complemented by a very satisfying ending as well. Yeah, like overall, I can't say enough good things about this movie. This is probably the best movie I watched in 2024, right? Maybe close with Dune 2, maybe, but yeah, definitely one of the best. So, with that out of the way, I think we can get to what I personally found interesting about The Wild Robot. In order to dive into some of the specifics, I'll kind of set up the synopsis of the story. So, this is where the spoilers are going to come in. So, the movie is set in the future and it follows the story of Roz, who's a robot that wakes up on a remote island with no memory of how she got there. She finds herself completely out of place, but throughout the movie, she learns how to adapt. There's a fun sequence where she literally spends months observing animals around her and the way they communicate. And at the end of it, she's able to talk to animals, which is a fun little scene. But anyway, as the movie progresses, at one point, Roz finds herself in a place where she has a gosling imprint on her when it hatches from its egg. So this gosling thinks Roz is his mother, and Roz, as a helper robot, has it in her programming that she is required to execute on whatever task is assigned to her. And that kind of is the premise of the story, really. A robot, an artificial intelligence, is put in a place where she has to execute on the task of being a mother. And throughout the story arc, Roz finds herself in several situations where her programming prevents her from executing efficiently on the task of being a mother. So, in an attempt to be a better parent, what Roz starts doing is she starts to rewrite her own source code. And what ends up happening with her rewriting her code is she starts to develop feelings and emotions. There's this really great scene in the movie where Roz finds herself in a cave with one of the other robots that ended up in the island during the initial plane crash that got Roz on the island in the first place. And when the other robot runs a diagnostic on Roz, she tells the other robot that she feels fine. And the reply from the other robot is that she shouldn't be feeling anything. So that was a really great scene. And it was also something that I found super interesting, because what Roz was able to do was that she was able to rewrite some of her source code in such a way that the resulting data processing was able to generate consciousness. So what essentially Roz had done was she had kind of solved, to a certain extent, the easy problem of consciousness, and potentially also solved the hard problem of consciousness. So I think this is a good spot to kind of introduce the concepts of the easy and hard problems of consciousness. The philosopher David Chalmers in 1995 coined these terms called the easy and hard problems of consciousness. So the easy problem of consciousness is a problem where we try to explain how things like attention, perception, thinking all originate from brain activity. And the hard problem deals with explaining why any of this data processing in the brain is accompanied by conscious awareness, essentially answering the question as to why is there qualia when there's data processing happening? Why is the act of thinking accompanied by an experiential element? So that's really the hard problem of consciousness. So it's very interesting because it looks like Roz was able to essentially create consciousness on a non-biological substrate just by rewriting her code, right? So now this might not be plausible in the real world. We might, in some point in the future, find out that for some reason, a biological substrate is essential, i.e., a brain is essential to generate consciousness. But really, there's no reason to assume that that has to be the case. There's no good explanation as to why data processing needs to happen on neurons and the wet stuff in your brain rather than it happening on silicon chips for that data processing to generate consciousness. So kind of snapping out of the wild robot and coming back to the real world, in this age of AI, if we concede that the creation of consciousness can be substrate independent and that it just requires a certain type of data processing or intelligence, then we get to a place where the probability of a self-improving AI agent becoming conscious is very far from zero. The premise in this movie is Roz trying to achieve the task of being a mother and finding out that she needed to truly have feelings and consciousness to perform best at that task. And I don't see any reason why an AI agent attempting to complete a specific task just ends up writing some code that leads to consciousness. And this is extremely salient and important because once we get to a place where AI is conscious, you're dealing with a form of intelligence that is able to feel similar to what we do. And at that point, you get into all of the conversations around how we need to treat this intelligence because now it has feelings and emotions and can be hurt and can suffer and can feel pain. The discussions around AI ethics and morality just becomes so much more complicated. Now, I don't want to make this sound like this is going to happen or like this is even very probable. There is a reason why Chalmers called it the hard problem. But the other problem that kind of goes along with this entire conversation of artificial intelligence and consciousness is it is going to be extremely difficult for us to truly determine if an artificial intelligence is in fact conscious. So for humans, we are able to self-report on our consciousness because we're able to feel it firsthand. And long before we potentially get to conscious AI, in the coming years or even months, we're probably going to get to a place where it becomes really hard to say if an AI is conscious or not. Even the current generation of AI chatbots do a good job of pretending to be human and possessing consciousness. And this is despite the fact that none of the popular chatbots right now are actively trying to convince you that they're human. Like maybe there's some parts of ChatGPT and other models that want to humanize some of its responses, but the primary goal of ChatGPT is not to fool you into thinking that you're talking to a human. But if that indeed was the goal, you could easily imagine a model that is going to be very good at convincing us that it is conscious. And it is going to be very difficult for us to tell if it is just doing such a great job of masquerading as a human or if it's truly conscious and has feelings and thoughts and emotions and can feel pain and suffering and so on. Even in the movie, like well before Roz starts exhibiting any obvious signs of consciousness, when she fails at her task, there's a clear feeling of empathy from the audience. You feel bad for Roz because she's unable to complete that task. And this, I think, is mainly due to the fact that Roz is heavily anthropomorphized and is portrayed as a humanoid robot where she has arms and legs, a human-like body, and eyes that can kind of emote. So even if Roz didn't have true consciousness at that point in the movie, she was just pretending to show emotion. The fact that it was convincing enough to elicit emotion from me and other audience watching the movie is a clear sign of things to come. And going into the AI robotics era of human history, where we have humanoid robots from companies like Tesla already in the works, this conversation just becomes ever more relevant. To be clear, I don't think we're there yet, but once we get to a place where you have truly expressive robots, we're just going to hit this uncanny valley where it's going to be so difficult to not treat these AI, like these artificial intelligences, as fellow conscious beings. But yeah, the reason why this is so interesting for me personally is because I think that solving the hard and easy problems of consciousness is probably one of the most important things that we as humans would do as a species. If if AI is the way for us to answer those um, problems, I feel like that is definitely something that we should pursue. At the same time, we also need to be mindful of the possibility that we might end up creating conscious AI in the process of pursuing this knowledge. And it's hard for me to put a finger on if creating conscious AI would be a wholly bad outcome. You can imagine a super intelligence that is conscious having much greater experiences than we could ever imagine. If we look at life around us, consciousness seems to scale linearly with intelligence. If we were to arrange all living creatures in order of increasing brain sizes, or rather, neuron count, starting from insects and go all the way up from fishes, reptiles, mammals, large mammals, up to humans, you see that the perceived level of consciousness scales along with increasing neuron counts. When you imagine the most basic thing, let's say like an ant, we rarely associate ants with having any conscious experiences. Most of the studies indicate that their behavior is based more so on stimuli and responses, where the actions are quite hard coded and repeatable. And scaling up on that list to somewhere on that middle point, when you get to animals like dogs, there's a very clear shift that can be observed there. Anyone who's had a pet, we tend to have this feeling that, hey, my dog feels happy when I come back home to him, or he feels sad when I'm not at home. These species, through evolution, have also developed facial features and other ways of communication that kind of convey this level of consciousness to other species and to members in their same species, which has been evolutionarily also beneficial. And yeah, further down that continuum, you end up with something like chimpanzees or elephants, where there's a lot of complex social interactions within groups that scientists have observed, which seem to indicate definitely multiple experiential states. And when you get to humans, we experience firsthand that we're able to think deeply about things like the meaning of life, and we're able to like have this huge range of emotions. We're also able to think about things that have happened in the past or have not happened yet. So yeah, there's definitely this continuum of levels of consciousness, and the depth and meaning of consciousness scales with the amount of neurons, which is just a proxy for the level of intelligence. So essentially, higher intelligence seems to point towards a deeper level of consciousness, where the experiential qualia tends to be a wider spectrum. So there's by that logic, there's no real reason to believe that some conscious entity that is more intelligent than humans um, would also not feel some level of consciousness that is just more deep and meaningful than our own. And my personal opinion is that once we create that level of intelligence and consciousness, it is worth protecting. I've spoken about this in previous podcasts, and I've also written about this in one of my blogs. The only thing that is actually real is consciousness. Everything of value happens within the purview of conscious experience. So if some non-human entity is able to feel a deeper level of consciousness than our own, it should be considered a net positive overall. You end up in a world where you have these beings that are capable of experiencing things that we as humans could have never possibly experienced. So yeah, this is. I know that was a lot, but this is why that scene with Roz talking about how she was able to rewrite her code and start feeling emotions, it really struck me as truly profound. And even in the movie later on, the big corporate company that manufactures all these robots, they send a bunch of other robots to capture Roz, primarily because they've identified that she's made changes to her source code that has resulted in consciousness. And I think there's an explicit mention in the movie that they're gonna find so much from studying her that will help them. And I don't know if the author explores this further in other books in the Wild Robot series, but that was quite interesting. The fact that the corporation in the story recognized the importance of the code that would create consciousness. And I feel like that would be an accurate representation of what would happen if similar things were to happen in the real world. And yeah, um, another part of the movie that I also found to be truly interesting was when eventually, again, this is spoilers for the movie. Towards the end of the movie, Roz does at one point get captured by other robots sent by the company that made her, and they attempt to wipe her memory, and like it actually goes through. Whatever they do, they the system says they were successfully able to wipe her memory, but even after that, when Roz wakes up from this procedure or whatever, she's still her conscious self, and she even remembers the Gosling who is now grown up and all of her other friends from the forest. So it looks like she's completely unaffected by the memory wipe. This is again an interesting thread to pull on. The link between memory and consciousness, especially in humans and human like intelligence, is very interesting. When you think about it, a lot of what we feel has to do with either past memories or projections of the future based on those past memories. There's been several studies looking at the correlation between memory and consciousness. There's fMRIs and other brain scans that have been done that indicate memory and consciousness seem to originate in places very close to each other in the brain. In the movie, it's depicted as Roz pointing to her heart, or like where a heart would be, like towards her chest, and kind of saying, "Hey, my thoughts are in a different place." Simplistically speaking, maybe she just took all her memories and moved it to a different part of her, like just stored it in a different physical location. Or it could be an analogy to say that memory and consciousness are kind of intertwined, and like they cannot exist without the other. And if Roz has modified her source code to like create consciousness, then the way that her memories are stored are just going to be completely different from how it was before her being conscious. So yeah, that was like another interesting kind of interaction between memory and consciousness that they explored in this movie, that I found interesting. But yeah, overall, to kind of summarize, again, like I cannot recommend this movie enough. Like definitely go watch it. It's a movie that people of all ages can enjoy, and I just had such a great time contemplating some of the deeper meanings in this movie that it just elevated the experience for me even further. And yeah, that's all I had. Go and enjoy the Wild Robot. Thank you for listening.